Welcome to another episode of Talks with T, where we discuss the entrepreneurial journey, the highs, the lows, and everything in between. And my goal and hope is to inspire entrepreneurs. And in my book, everyone can be and everyone is born an entrepreneur. I'm very lucky today to have Aniss Harb on the episode. He's the general manager of the MENA region for Deliveroo, which is one of the biggest food delivery businesses globally and one of the biggest in the United Arab Emirates and across other GCC markets. Aniss is not only a dear friend of mine, we've known each other for 14, 15 years, so I do get a little bit personal in this episode, but he also has an amazing story of switching careers and industries, graduating during the financial crisis, going from corporate Amazon world to pretty much a startup. I really enjoyed this episode. I took a couple of things away around managing emotions and just having expectations that there will be waves of success, not trying to be in control all the time, and really focusing on the inputs and not focusing too much on the outcomes, because there are many factors that could impact that. If you're a new listener, welcome to the show. Please hit the subscribe button on whatever medium or platform you're listening on. And I hope you get as much out of this episode as I did. Thanks for listening. So yeah, you were talking about the Deliveroo Awards.
Yeah, so we're doing our first ever Deliveroo Awards now. And it's a full production. And the beauty is we're doing it only online. So we can just, so we can film everything kind of in one day, because we announced the winners. It's just going to be like the logo on the screen. So I can say, and the winner is, and then the logo. So we can pre-tape everything. Yeah. So we rented a villa a few weeks ago. I did the first kind of take, and the second one I did yesterday. I'm just like it's not my comfort zone. And I'm like mad at myself that I want to give the guys more, like you have this whole team and everyone's filming, and they work with probably actors and blah blah blah, and I'm like, every time I finish a take, I'm like, I just wish I was better. And also I can't be controversial, because it's like the restaurants, I can't be seen to show bias or anything, so I'm trying to be like neutral. But then the other guys come and they have more fun, the ambassadors, and they're like funny, and we have some good ones. So we have a restaurant awards we're announcing next week. Should be fun.
How do you guys come up with that idea? Is it something you guys are doing globally, or it's?
Yeah, well, we did it in the UK only, nowhere else. And we're like, you know what, because a lot of the restaurant awards are in person here. You get a table. It's like a restaurant industry event. I think it's just this is a bit more flexible. It's only online. It's Deliveroo style kind of thing, right? Like it doesn't need to be physical. So we're gonna see the feedback this time and see how it goes. In the UK, it's great, and the restaurants love it. I mean, yesterday, all the finalists brought in their whole menu. There was a whole menu for like 5 restaurants in the finals. So, you just imagine the food there. Yeah, restaurants are super engaged, and it's just a fun time. We're gonna announce best Japanese, best whatever, best burger, best this, best that, and then we have restaurant of the year, which is a kind of more vague. That's a big one. But first round is we open up to everybody for 5 days. Customers vote. We've had tons of votes, and then we basically come up with a short list, and then from the short list, we put it up again for voting. Yeah. So it's customer rounds, and then the only one that's different is restaurant of the year award, where they've picked the 5, and then the judges go and they taste the food, which was what happened yesterday, and then there was like a scoring system. And based on that, we announced the winner. Tell the story of how you ended up at Deliveroo, because you were like employee number what? High teens, I'd say, and now today probably the third, most tenured person at Deliveroo. So I've kind of seen it from the beginning. So it was definitely under 100. Definitely. Okay, definitely. And how many people are at Deliveroo globally today? Probably over 4,000. Wow. 4,000 people. Okay. And so how did you slip your way in? Now if you're there, over 2 years, you're like, it's like probably 90th percentile or something, right? Because it's just it's crazy. Even when I joined Amazon UK, it was, I had joined whatever 2012, 2013. I think I was also like in the UK office in the 90th percentile. Like by the time I left, it just shows you like how quickly these things can grow when they catch on, right? And how big the business has gotten since. So I was living in London. I worked for Amazon. I had come up to my sort of 2 years there, learned so much. But I kind of always had this entrepreneurial bug where I wanted to come and, deploy my skills into something that I would be good at and build something that was like really important to me. I'd actually delved into a few entrepreneurial projects before Amazon, but didn't work out for whatever reason. And then I said, I'm going to take a step back, go learn from the best, really make sure that it's very clear what I bring to the table, and as opposed to being someone who just really wants to start a business, feel comfortable in a skill set and then go and like from that try to build something. So after Amazon, I felt very comfortable, or much more comfortable, thinking about the consumer and building a good consumer value proposition. So like these were like things that you really like, they really, you learn, and also being very articulate of how you want to execute, like very action oriented. So a lot of great skills I picked up there. And I said, okay, I'm like, all right, what's next? I thought about starting something in the Middle East. I knew it was really, really early. This is 2014, mid 2014. What can I do there? What's interesting? And at the same time, Will, who's the founder and CEO of Deliveroo, had started Deliveroo in 2013, I believe. And I was kind of in touch with him. I kind of knew what he was doing, and I started to ask.
How did you know Will?
We went to business school together. So we met in Philly in 2010, and we were friends. And we also actually went to the same undergrad.
Okay.
And so we did our MBA and undergrad, but different times for the undergrad.
Yeah.
So we kind of had quite a bit in common just from that, and then just kind of built a friendship there, and then carried over into London. So I was just in touch. I had a sense of what he was doing, and at the beginning I was a bit dismissive of the idea, just because why would food delivery work in the Middle East? We've been doing it for 20 years and whatever. It's kind of mature. And then he started getting a couple of big rounds. I think Index led the first round. I'm like, okay, let me just see what's kind of interesting about this model. And what I liked it was that it was a high frequency kind of model, right? You didn't need a massive market for it to be very valuable. Dubai is relatively small. The UAE is relatively small population wise versus some of these big markets. So I said, okay, if I'm going to consider something in the Middle East, I want to do something that's going to be very high frequency, which is, I guess, similar to also ride hailing, right? It's also high frequency, and that's why it did well. So I flew over to do research on the market.
And at this point, you've quit Amazon,
not yet.
Okay,
not
you're
yet.
still in Amazon.
Not yet. I was like, I'm still okay. Now it's time to start like seriously researching businesses. I went here. I was like, okay, I think this could work. Started talking to a bit of investors, gauging appetite. Very, very early, just like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Talked to a few people that I could potentially start a team with. Then I ran into, while I was doing my research, I ran into Faraz Khalid, who is CEO of Noon, who's also a classmate. We kind of caught up, and I said, that's what I'm thinking. And he said, oh, you know what, this could be really interesting. Food's interesting here. I think he was between Namshi and probably Noon at the time. Why don't we do something together, and you can be part of this like thing I'm building. I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, I was completely open. Like, I wasn't like, oh, I have to do this myself. For me, it was more about building than it was about this being mine. Like, I don't, or me being like the CEO, founder, whatever.
Why did you have kind of this urge of building? Like, where did that urge to build come from?
I think I've always kind of had this entrepreneurial bug for whatever reason. I've always liked the idea of building something on my own.
Yeah.
And I tried. Like I said earlier, I started something while at business school called One Away, which is basically using the geolocation of your phone to show you your friends nearby. So very similar technology to like a dating app, but we used it for like work, which was obviously a mistake. But we actually launched it. We got some money from an accelerator there. Wasn't happy with the traction, even though it was we got a couple thousand users in Philly at the time. It was really fun. But that's when actually I had learned, like, actually, what am I really bringing to the table here, except like kind of like a real drive to win and competitiveness. I need to kind of build a more consumer-like skill set. Because before that, I was in banking, and like, my skill set was not, how do you build a business and how do you think about consumers, etc. I'm someone that just kind of needs to like see it, and when I see it, I absorb it very quickly. It's just like that's my style of learning. Even growing up, like when I studied for tests, I would just do practice exams. I would never read the theories, read the books, right? So it's just my style. So for me, like going back and doing something like Amazon was important because I was just able to see what my peers were doing, what my managers were doing, what the VPs were doing, and like I would just like watch, right? And this is what also I did at Deliveroo. I watched a lot. I watched Will in the early days, colleagues and managers, etc., around me, and I just kind of learned how they were thinking about things. Yeah. So for us, that we can potentially do this together. I said, okay, cool. So what's next? He said, maybe put some thoughts together, put a business plan. Let's catch up in a few days, and we'll take it from there. I said, cool. So I kind of did more research, and I actually had a flight in 4 days. So I was like, okay, I'll see Faraz on the third day before I head out. So I barely like socialized. I didn't see my friends, family at the time. I was just head down on this kind of 3-page doc that I wanted to do, very kind of concise to the point. I was like, this is going to be good. And then I finished it, and then I called Faraz, and he didn't pick up. And then I sent a message. I said we should meet so I can show you my plan. And he didn't pick up. I found out years later that he had been going through a lot at the time of the transition, so he was just very distracted. We're good friends, so it's nothing. I tell him the story all the time. But he never built this business plan to share with Faraz. But now I had this plan, right? Yeah. So which was also good.
And I invested all this goddamn time in this document.
Exactly. So I had this document. Yeah. I used that doc as a teaser to investors. Yeah.
So your idea at the time was, I'm going to raise around and just do this on my own.
Yeah. Okay. And I was going to be in all the cities in all the major golf cities and GCC cities, and that'll be like that'll be what I do. At the same time, I was actually messaging Will about like assumptions. Like, hey, how do you think about throughput? How do you think about basket size? And he was being very responsive. And I mean, he was literally in like 3 suburbs of London, like not even in Manchester, like not even so for me, I was like, maybe this will be a major UK business for Will. Like maybe one day he'll go to Europe, but like I never could have imagined that he was thinking about like the world, right? So that's why I was so kind of asking him all these questions, and he was, but he was being very nice and helping me. And then he said, why don't we have a chat when you're back in London? So him and I had a chat, showed him my plan, showed him how I thought about the business. And I remember we went to like a pub in his neighborhood, and we just kind of went through it. And then we talked about the business for like an hour, and then he said, super early in my mind, but we're about to raise like a Series B. I think it was XL at 25 million. It's confidential, but why don't we definitely want to use this for international expansion. Why don't you come in and run the Middle East? I was like, whoa, this is not what I expected. But so I went home and thought about it.
And you had gone to have a meet up with Will to talk about your...
Yeah, I mean, I was exactly. I was like, he's going to come.
Do you have a name at the time for what you were trying to set up?
I had a placeholder name. Okay. I knew that, names are not my thing. So I think like I have the 3-page actually. It's oh my. It was like, oh my delivery, something like really cheesy.
Okay.
I don't think I told him the name just for credibility purposes.
Yeah, I don't blame you. You wouldn't have blown anyone away with that name.
So, but I still have it actually, and it's funny. I looked at my assumptions recently. I was like, and it wasn't too far off with what, which was actually quite funny with where we are today. So, there's a lot of skill sets that you need to be a CEO founder. I don't know if I had that, right? There was some things I was very good at, some things I wasn't. So I wasn't sure that was for me anyway. So I wasn't like, I have to do this, right? So for me, the priority was building. That I don't know if you ever read this. It was like entrepreneur versus entrepreneur. What's the difference, kind of thing. And entrepreneurs tend to do just a whole like a wider spectrum of activities, where entrepreneurs focus on building from within like an infrastructure ecosystem, which is. So I kind of did something in between, right? So love that, and so I said, I'm gonna go do this. I'll learn a lot. If it fails, find out. I'll start to kind of hone in what I'm good at, etc. If I'll be ready for the next one if things don't go to plan. So I ended up joining with the kind of promise that I'd be running the Middle East one day. But he's like, we're so early. Why don't you come and just be in the London office, work with the team, and then you can help me launch other new markets in the area. So I ended up joining the London team, where we had to get a whole new like visa sponsorship. Like it was like, it was really a startup, right? It was, I knew everybody in the 20 people in the company. We'd go finish after work. We'd go out for drinks almost every night. Like, really nice culture. Everyone was close. Made some really, really great friends from those early days. And then I was kind of sent off to Dublin for a few months to help the business there. And then a few months later, moved here it was actually summer. It was August of 2015. Moved here with a couple of people that I kind of poached from the London office, and we started selling restaurants and figuring out, how to get drivers. And that was kind of the start of like the whole business here. I was just lucky. We made a couple of really good hires initially that was just complementary, and the business kind of started from there.
Yeah, I mean, 2015 in terms of where the region is from, quote unquote tech startup hub is really early, right? And not a lot of companies that started in 2015 are still around. So what was that experience like, trying to set up in Dubai, which, has come a long way supporting entrepreneurs, but back then that wasn't at the top of the local agenda.
Yeah, it was really a handful. We had an investor called Hummingbird that had made a couple of investments here. I think it was Marca VIP at the time, who was very helpful to like kind of showing me around. Two things surprised me. I think one is it was very early, so you felt like really there was like the ecosystem was tiny, and you were like, oh, is this really going to take off in the Middle East and in Dubai? So I wasn't like, I was a bit, there was a couple of big investors, a couple of big entrepreneurs, few companies, but it didn't feel like, okay, this is like heating up. But two is I felt like everyone was very supportive. So, when this investor introduced me to Marca, the guys, they were very helpful. Obviously I had my old classmates, I met with, I think Mudassir at the time, I met with Uber, just kind of, these were like, just understanding the landscape. And everyone was just helpful. And I think that's kind of, I've carried that trend on. Anybody who needs sort of help setting up, I always try to make time. I think the ecosystem is it's friendly generally here, and it's gone much better. But that, I think, it's been static. It's gone much bigger, but the friendliness has always been there, I think. So yeah, I didn't really feel like I was part of like a startup ecosystem. I was kind of just doing my own thing, and disrupting in a lot of our own ways, right? But at the same time that checkout.com was starting here, like all these kind of early guys that would that I would met those early days that we have really good relationships now. We kind of grew together. It was great. Yeah.
And what was it like? I mean, there's no such thing as kind of a driver ecosystem. Most restaurants here had delivery, or many restaurants had delivery, but they used their fleet. And so, what was that experience like, actually going out there and getting this thing off the ground?
Yeah, the rider. The idea of agencies employing riders and then working with aggregators, I mean, that did not exist. I think we scraped together 20 riders through one agency that we had met at the time. They were very supportive, but really stressful. Actually, to de-risk that, we actually started a agency ourselves, and the plan was to employ our own riders directly in case that the ecosystem never took off. So we actually at some point had 100 riders on our own visas because, I had two jobs, right? I had to ensure we had rider supply, and I had to ensure that we had restaurant supply. So those were like the kind of two nuts and bolts of like our business. So de-risk that with potentially our own agency but then ultimately, like, we saw so many agencies come up. A lot of ex-riders started their own agencies. It was really nice to see, like, the entrepreneurship that we kind of unleashed within that world. The restaurants, I think it was quite difficult because they weren't used to paying for logistics. So, and they didn't know what we were bringing to the table because, they're like, oh, you're a Dubai startup. We've seen this kind of model before. No one really knew the service differentiation we would bring eventually. So there was a lot of...
I can imagine like the pitch is, I'm going to bring you new new customers. I'm gonna help the logistics infrastructure, but you had no track record. You had no users.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
what are you pitching at that stage?
We really just had to focus on. We really just had to focus on service. We were like, look at our technology, and I would demo, and sometimes the demos wouldn't work, and I would be sweating in this August. Like I was like showing them how our app would work. It was all connected. So I think we had to really sell on like the tech element, and ultimately that was our differentiator with these restaurants. And then eventually, so once we got enough critical mass of restaurant supply and riders, customers came because either we were bringing on restaurants that didn't offer delivery. I think our first kind of big one was Busaba. And then they came on because our service was differentiated. They could track their rider, and that was very novel and blah, blah, blah. At the time, there was nobody else. Actually, there was a company called Foodora that was owned by Delivery Hero. They had shut down at some point into the first year, but they were also so it was kind of both of us doing it. So here we were like two like kind of startups battling it out in a market that wasn't really ready, but we weren't sure even was ready for what we had to offer. So it was kind of all very stressful.
Yeah, and I'd imagine sometimes in the journey of every entrepreneur, when you're starting a new idea, there's moments of like, is this even going to work in the early days, right? And so did you face any of those thoughts? Did you kind of have any of those questions in your mind? Or did you have full conviction that this makes sense, it's going to work?
I knew there was a niche for us because I was convinced that today, even that customers will adopt something, even if it's a little bit better than what they have, as long as they can try it. So, and I was also seeing the traction in London at the time. I know what's in the market. I know consumers will like what we have more. The question is how big will that be? So we actually were one of the slowest starts out of all markets because of the maturity of the industry here. So when we were doing like the kind of country rankings, like the UAE was actually at the bottom for quite a while, and then we kind of had a hockey stick a little bit later. I had deep conviction in our consumer value prop and where we're headed. I just didn't know how big it would be.
And so I guess London, the UK operation helped give some conviction that consumers would definitely be willing to use a service like this. What was the moment where you're like, holy smokes, this is going to be massive?
I think the traction in London was you talking the UAE or just generally?
UAE.
I think we had this moment where, so after we kind of had our first hockey stick, we were kind of capturing a lot of I would say a certain segment of the market that were kind of early adopters to Deliveroo, and we kind of captured that, and we were growing quite nicely. What kind of eluded us, I think, was more mainstream. And I think there was this moment, I think in 2020, right after COVID, we had a couple of exits in the market. I think Uber Eats had left the market. Zomato was bought by Delivery Hero. And then we kind of saw this like really big change. And then we started going way more mainstream.
What do you mean by mainstream?
Like we just kind of captured the mass market of the UAE, and we saw this with the restaurants that were being ordered. It stopped being, for example, only healthy salad places started being your mass market QSRs, for example, became much bigger part of our business, and that's when that it's kind of so then it became okay. We're here to compete for number one in the market now, and that kind of hit us during that time.
Wow. So like from 2015 to 2020, you still had question marks.
I wasn't sure we would win outside of that kind of segment, the initial kind of more premium, more kind of maybe catering more to a more expat segment of the market, etc. But I wasn't, and it was just everyone kind of became all the big players here became kind of affiliated with like certain segments that they kind of like owned.
Yeah.
And we didn't know we can crack out of it. And then I think after that we were, then it became, okay, we can, and we're executing well. The team did a great job, and we just started going after different segments effectively, and became a much bigger business.
During that time, from like kind of 2015 to 2020, does that thought sit in the back of your mind? Like, do we have the scope to be number one? Do we have the ability to kind of crack out of the segment, our niche, if you want to call it that? Does that kind of gnaw at you in the back of your mind, or do you kind of keep it at bay and say, we'll figure it out as it comes.
Definitely top of mind.
Yeah.
I mean, we as a business, we plan, we do a lot of kind of 12-month planning, 3-year planning, 5-year planning. We're just always thinking about, you need to, what's the vision? And the vision's always, be number one. So you have to think about this. You have to think about what it's going to take to get there.
Does that create some stress for you, kind of having that thought in the back of your...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the pace of this, the intensity of this business, given the aggression and the money in it, it's super intense. It's extremely stressful.
The interesting part is balancing that continuous drive to be number one, or that drive to have an audacious goal, balancing that with the amount of stress it can create is an interesting balance to manage. And so for me, you've always come across as someone who's even keeled, like there's no extreme highs or lows, at least from the outside looking in. And is that observation valid in your view?
I think the stress I felt was kind of, I guess there's two ways I would get stressed, especially in those times. I think one is just I wanted to win, and there's so many things outside your control, with that, and so how would restaurants react to something, or consumers react to something, or are you doing the right thing? So it's just this idea that desire to win, and the work was endless, right? So it was always on your mind. So I was always kind of thinking about how do I win, and then there was also the people element, So you're kind of, you really want the output to drive you to number one. So you're thinking about all those inputs to like get you there, and then you're thinking about, and then related to that is the team. So, hiring, managing difficult conversations. Are you inspiring your team? Is your team performing at a high level? So all these kind of things would kind of keep me up. I think over time, what was really important is I started to let go of that feeling of like wanting to be in control all the time, and just focus very much on the inputs and things I could control, and really being able to step back from, just controlling those outputs. I think that was a skill that I learned in this role, and I applied it actually to other parts of my life, whether it's through outside of work, right? I think that's just a good skill to have. Being able to let go of things, because you ultimately you have a certain way you want things to pan out, whether in life or work, etc. And then if you don't, it agitates the mind if you don't get there, and it's just like you have these loops and you get anxiety and blah blah. So I think being able to kind of let go of that has been really important. I think related to that, I think it's also important to have the mindset where to expect there to be sort of waves of success. 2 or 3 things will go my way, one thing won't, and just have that expectation, because if you expect it, then it just doesn't hit you enough. It's not like, oh my God, this thing happened to me, right? So, or happened to my team, or happened to the business. So you kind of, you take your wins, you take your losses, and you just kind of let that kind of wave come in and out. And then I think very helpful in sort of managing stress. When it comes to kind of with the team, I think it's important to understand yourself, to really take stock of how you react to certain situations and why. Is there any ego in your decision making? Or if you feel something is off, why do you feel that off? So I just think it's constantly like taking stock of your emotions, understanding yourself, and then being very true to who you are, right? So if some situation with people gets to you, understand why that is, and work on that, and identify that, or discuss that and be direct.
The idea of being extremely self-aware has come up a few times in some of the things you've said. It's something I've only really developed, like honestly, if I'm gonna be quite frank with myself, it's something I've only really developed in the past 2 years, where I'll analyze the way I reacted in a meeting to understand why, right? So let's say something happens in a meeting. Before, I would just walk away and just carry on with my day. Just be like, oh, that was a bad meeting, right?
Yeah.
It was a bad meeting, and then I'd say because the team didn't come prepared, or we didn't have all the answers that we should have had before even walking into the meeting, or even getting bad news, right? Being frustrated by it without really understanding why am I frustrated by the bad news. And for me, that's really changed only in the past year or two, where if something happens, I can't really identify when this trigger or this light bulb went on, but now when something happens, I'll actually start to think about my internal mechanism of how I reacted to it, and why did I react that way, or what am I, is there something behind the first layer of the onion?
Yeah.
And that to a large extent is what you're saying you've done. Has it always been that way for you? Did something trigger?
Yeah, I think it's similar to you. I think it's probably, in the last 2 to 3 years, but very similar. It's that self-awareness. I think it's understanding yourself, but also, and then I think extension of that also what triggers other people, and being able to kind of understand their motivations and their actions. You're constantly thinking about evaluating yourself, evaluating your surroundings. And I think what's really, really, really important is that you're very true to who you are, and whatever leadership style you have is consistent, and people know what they're subscribing to. With me, I think from the very beginning, I tried very hard to create a culture where, ideas win. So super meritocratic. Is that even a word?
Meritocracy.
Meritocracy environment. Meritocratic. Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's a real word, but it is today officially signed and stamped. Where are you, Webster?
And an environment where that was very kind of open and transparent, where people can complain to me about can talk to you about anything, and my decision making is always very transparent for people, and I've always been very consumer obsessed. So that's kind of I think that's kind of the style that I've sort of had with people. I have things that I really want to, I'm still working on, etc. But that core for me has been consistent. That's kind of helped me alleviate a lot of stress and anxiety managing, big teams and people. It's because I became much more comfortable that this is my style and I kind of finesse a few aspects of it, but I wouldn't try to become a whole new person. I'm not someone who goes into the office and tries to do a highly motivational war speech, right? That's just not my style. But my style is X, Y, and Z, so people know what they're getting, and and they help me evolve that style maybe naturally, right? But I think coming to terms with that, because I was a very sort of young, inexperienced manager when I first started 7 years ago, and so now we have a team of 350 people. So I was always not very confident about each kind of step, but feel much better today because of that kind of realization that you have to understand yourself and be true to your style.
What are some of the things you're working on?
I view that we're all on a sports team together, right? And I view my work, I have a specific role in that sports team that gets more attention, but I really believe that it's as valuable as more junior, a junior person on the team. We just have a different role to play on this team. So for me, sometimes I don't appreciate that sometimes people would, want to hear from me more or want to hear what I say more, right? My role actually, one of my key roles is, for example, is I help, with decision making, I help problem solve, and ultimately I'll help the direction of the way the business is moving. That's my role, right? But I may not be good at sales, for example, and you're doing the sales role, but the salesperson maybe wants to hear from me more and wants that. And for me, I'm always kind of low key and I'm just doing my role and sometimes so I have to work on being a bit more visible and giving people, because that's what people want, right? Yeah. And so that's kind of that's one of the things I'm working on.
One thing I saw a manager do really well when I was at GE was he wasn't he's now actually the COO at Twilio actually. But one thing he did really well was had that realization and then adapted it to his style, and he enjoyed reading and writing. So he'd send out his thoughts in a really well-written, really well-structured email once every 2 weeks. And that made everyone feel, anywhere in the region, made everyone feel like they were spending actually time with him, because the note would be somewhat personal. It'd also have some stuff around the business.
That's really great.
And so I think there's even ways to adapt how you're visible.
I think that's great. And that comes back to my point earlier, keep your style, but, but also, do what you need to as well, right? So, and this is something that if people want it, I have to figure out how to do it within my style.
Yeah.
And that's something, but I think that's a really good example. And I've seen other people do that, in our business, in other markets. Those people are actually a little bit less comfortable, a bit more comfortable sharing. And some people are less private than others. And some people are very open. I've seen people like be incredibly open with how it's going with their kids and their families. And, and I'm like, whoa, like, would that work for me? I don't know, maybe, so you kind of see these different examples and you say, okay, maybe I'll try it or something. But the point is, I guess, to the audience especially, is that it has to work for you as well. Yeah. Like the right things to do, but then it has to kind of fit into your style.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's also easier for people with families to share what they're doing on the weekend versus, a single male in his, mid-30s on what he's up to on the weekends. You said something around being focused on what's in your control and managing those. I mean, what are examples of things that you used to focus on, you no longer focus on because they're out of your control?
I think about it as inputs and outputs, right? So I think inputs are the things that drive a certain result.
What are examples?
I don't know, say you're in a restaurant negotiation. What you can control is doing the work to come up with the best deal, doing the right things to craft the right relationship or whatever it is. But ultimately, and you do your best at that. Those are the inputs. And the output is, does it work? Do you get the deal or whatever? And I would, previously, this is a small example, but I would previously, the result of an action would I would think about the output the entire, during the process and, until I get the actual outcome, and it would stress me. Now I focus everything on the inputs and the output be what it may, right? Even say, for example, we need a product change. And, we have an engineering bandwidth issue in the UK, for example. I would do, the inputs for me is make the case, align stakeholders, get the right kind of people behind me, and try to get it on the roadmap. And if it works, great, right? That's the output, because I think that the output will influence the consumer or our business in some way. If not, I wouldn't get stressed about it. I understand that this is the business. The business is it's not just me in the business. There's a collection of people making decisions, and I'm not always going to get the output that I want. And so I focus on the next set of inputs that I need to deliver output. That's been important to kind of.
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive observation, because I think focusing on the outcome is what actually creates the stress and the anxiety, right? Stress and anxiety is created by our own perception of what something should look like in the future, right? Which this is all Stoic philosophy, right? Which is that's out of your control, and focus on what's in your control. I subscribe to that a lot. Deliveroo was by no means your first entrepreneurial endeavor. I know that you had at least 2 or 3 shots at it, one at a e-commerce and
So after I finished, I did kind of 2 years banking out of undergrad. That was it was 2007, so that was sort of what everyone who,
it's crazy to think that like pre 2010 or 2012, maybe even 2015, before that time, like to be the perception of what it meant to be successful and making money was to go into banking, consulting.
Right? Banking, consulting, law were like,
you've made it. If you got those jobs.
The smart kids did that, right? Like that was kind of the idea.
Yeah.
And I mean, think about it. In 2007 was when the iPhone came out, right?
That
was my graduating year.
Yeah.
I was like, there's no way I'm a BlackBerry user forever kind of thing, And then you kind of had these wars where
BBM until I die.
I think, the way you look at there's definitely a lot of luck in this kind of batch of people now that, senior in e-commerce field or whatever, there was a luck factor, right? Or timing factor for say, right? We were in this window of like things were just starting to happen on the internet, especially e-commerce, which is what I got into. Before that, it's virtually impossible, right? So 2009 finished banking. I was like, Groupon was starting to come out. I was like, okay. So after banking, I was like, okay, I'm not very good at this. I need to, I want to, and I kind of said two things after that experience. I said, I'm not going to choose a job for money, number one. And I need to change, industries or fields. And
what made you think you weren't good at the banking gig?
It just wasn't for me. I mean, this, theoretical work where there's no execution, you couldn't really, you're doing advisory, etc. Like for me, like deal making was just not, I wanted to actually, I wanted to get like my hands dirty and like operate and stuff. That was kind of important. I wanted to negotiate. I wanted to kind of build something with my hands. Like I really needed to feel, what I was building. And consulting and banking, consulting definitely is more theoretical. Advisory, banking, it depends on what you get into. And then private equity could be more interesting actually. I think it's a stepping stone for a lot of for people who do banking. In 2009-10, I started working with a really good friend of mine, Hassan, who basically founded this business called Team Buy in Canada, which was the first Groupon style group buying company there. And I started spending a bit of time with him before business school. And so I was in Toronto for a bit working with him. And it was like super exciting. It was like the first time I've seen, he built something really, really cool there. Like, big team, all young, everyone's wearing t-shirts. It just felt like, and I came from this like banker world. So I was like, wow, this is entrepreneurial. It seems really fun. I love this. But at the same time, I also felt like, where can I add value? 24 years old. I only have a financial skill set. Was very close to that business for some time. Then ultimately tried my own thing. Out of what we talked about earlier, the 108, which was the entrepreneurial, that app, which should have been a dating app, that wasn't. And then
So it was like LinkedIn, Tinder,
or social, yeah, or like it was a Facebook, find my friend, LinkedIn kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And the idea was that if you and I were in the same room, and we weren't friends on Facebook, we would get a thing. If we had common friends, it would highlight that, and I can go be like, hey. And the whole premise was that you meet a lot of people through friends. Let's just make it easier for you. That was the whole principle.
Yeah.
But then after that, I was like, okay, you know what? After that, I was like, okay, was I really good at that? Like being like a founder, CEO, or do I need to go back and kind of learn? So that kind of motivated me to go to Amazon and learn from the best and what they were doing. At the time, they were in a few verticals even. It was also kind of early for Amazon. This is 10 years ago. Stock price was $200, I think, at the time. That was kind of the motivation that led me there. And then I was kind of ready for that next step. And that's kind of when I went in with the whole idea of starting a delivery app. It was when I had conviction in my skill set and that I knew I could add value either as a founder or as a partner to someone building something.
I alluded to this earlier. There's clearly kind of this theme of you continuously being self-aware of what you're capable of and where there are gaps that you need to fill. Where did that come from? That almost brutally honest self-awareness.
I come from a household where we were, where it was a lot of love, but we were very open with like where we could be better. And I was extremely competitive, whether it was in tennis growing up or academics. And I always wanted to win, but I was always like, okay, how did you do? Like, trying to learn from how other people did things. And I was very open to people telling me like, actually, I would have approached this differently. And I think seeking feedback and being open to criticism is an incredibly like, I don't know if it's a skill or what you call it, right? Just like a attitude almost, right? It's just people that inspired me also be very humble. I think one of them is Will, is our founder CEO. I also watched him in the early days, and who was also very true to his style. He had a very good humility around what he was good at and what he wasn't. I think that was for me a really good lesson. He was also very, very good at giving people the space to execute and trusting them, and that was also something that helped guide me because I saw how motivating it could be to people with high potential when you gave them space to operate. How much oversight do I give this person? But really, when you give people space and they're talented, you'll be surprised at what they can deliver. And in the moment you find yourself having to spend too much time with that person, or they're not, then maybe it wasn't the right person. That's also, again, it comes back to your style. Like if you're comfortable doing that, then you're lucky because that's the situation where you have a very motivated team that will grow and execute well and I think that's a good place to be in.
So your hypothesis is the self-awareness came from, as a younger version of yourself, always being open to getting feedback and questioning how you can get better on the tennis court or in school or in one of these facets.
That's built a trait in me that allowed me to always welcome other people's opinion. Even to this day, by the way, I always ask people, like, we're making a decision, you know, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And then kind of like just kind of thinking through how people, because you're always going to miss stuff, right? And so feeling comfortable asking people for their opinions and then being transparent about the decision making. But I think that's, when I was young, I kind of had that attitude. But then I think being self-aware, that's kind of an adult thing, right? Like you start reading more, you start talking to people. You know, you and I have spoken a lot about self-awareness. You know, I think I would say you probably started working on it much earlier than I did. And then things just start to click, you know, and like, especially when you kind of need to be in my like role. It's like there's a little bit of a pressure to evolve, because if you don't, you know, whatever, you could burn out, or you could not be a good manager, or you can, you know, you want to have a good team, whatever it is, right? So there is that kind of the catalyst that, you know, helped me like continue to get better at that and work on that. But it is work. Yeah,
100%.
But it's also academic. Like, I mean, there's books that, you know, show you how your mind works and how you've been predisposed to see the world.
Yeah.
Is you know, is really important, but it is academic, right? And once you kind of get over that line, there's so much more you can unlock. And because you see people sometimes, right, like who are in a rut in how they think about, you know, they get agitated because they see the world a certain way, but they're not sure why they see the world a certain way, and so that kind of cycle continues to repeat, right? But if you know that actually, I can change that, I can work on the root cause. And that will make me a more happier, lighter, more fulfilled person. That carries over in work and with your family and your friends.
Yeah. One thing I'm trying to learn more from you is having the right work-life balance. I think I've always had this perception that it's only about the hours. I think it's true at times, and at times it's not. It's not necessarily true. Like, I think I don't know how to turn on and off the button of working my butt off. And the reality is I probably overestimate how important I am to the business at this scale, right? People are executing 99% of what needs to get executed, and my contribution is a drop in the ocean compared to the efforts they have. And so how have you been able to always maintain that right balance between working hard, but then also finding the space to, you know, nurture your own passions or spend quality time with people around you?
I think if you want to do something for the long run, I think as a baseline, it's good to set working hours, right? So let's assume you say it's 9 to 6, 9 to 7, and that's your baseline. So you work in those hours. Now, when you go over that, you have to have a very set of criteria of why you would go over that. It's a mindset. So it's just being very, very conscious about what's happening after. Because I think the work never stops. I mean, I could work till midnight every night if I wanted. There's just endless things to read, etc. I'll do that when there's a critical input, and when there isn't, I tell other people in the office as well, you know, stop working past this time. If we have something that's critical that needs to be launched, you know, by this date, we're all gonna, you know, we all have to put in those extra hours. But I think those should be the exceptions, not the norm, especially outside of the first, you know, 2 to 3 years where you're the entrepreneur doing everything, right? When you have the team, and really that's why you have the team, right? And if you find yourself having to do things after 7, 8, 9, 10, then I would question your org and your team, right? So I think you should work towards that. So I tell that also the people in the team, in my team, it's like, you know, if you're working so hard, let's review your org. Do you need more help, right? Because I want to get people to that. This is what you should work in, and so people will, you know, have longevity in the business. That's kind of what we're working towards.
I know that to a large extent you're only getting started when it comes to Deliveroo. There's still a lot to do, and you know, I'm super proud not just as a fellow entrepreneur, but also as a friend, to see everything you've accomplished. I remember when you first launched, you were trying to test the amount of time it would take from restaurant, basically the whole, delivering in under 30 minutes. And so you used me effectively as a guinea pig for free food. And so I have recollection of the early days as you guys were getting started. So I'm super proud of you on what you've accomplished and what the team's accomplished. So a lot of respect and pride there as a friend.
Thank you. I remember you placing those test orders and you going over budget. I was like, did you really have to spend 200 dirhams on a test order? You're like, oh, what? I thought there was no budget.
Yeah, I mean, you hadn't you didn't specify a preset.
Yeah, that was my mistake.
And with me, you have to define the boundary. A couple of things I heard you say in the conversation today that I'm really taking away. One is focus on what's in your control and don't stress about the outputs. The second is really expect wins and losses. They're inevitable. And so having the expectation around both will happen will really help manage anxiety and ensure that there's an even keel of emotion. I've had a lot of fun doing this with you, so thanks a lot for taking the time.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun, and really proud that you're doing this. This is obviously, I mean, you have a full-time job, and really proud that you're actually able to spend the time to do something like this. So well done to you.
My man.